As promised, now I'm going to show you how to make my gluten-free fry bread next. And again, I have my ingredients all measured out, so I'm going to show you what I've got. The first thing that you need is your gluten-free flour. So I'm going to use Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 baking flour, and this is a rice and tapioca starch based gluten-free flour. Now, in general, there's two types of flours. There is more of a bean or legume based gluten-free flour, or there's a rice flour base. And some combine both. For example, this one is a mix of rice and tapioca starch, and it also has pea hull fiber. So this is reasonable to use. However, it is going to have a different taste. This is the one that I recommend. Just using a rice flour mixture, and it should have xanthan gum already in it. So this is a blend, and I'll let you know what's in there. There's white rice flour, whole grain brown rice flour, potato starch, tapioca flour, xanthan gum. So this is a good flour for this recipe. It works really, really well, and this is my favorite to use for this specific fry bread. The other flour that we need is our corn flour. This is Mesa, so it's nixtamalized corn flour that has then been dried and ground, and so I'm going to use 2 cups of the rice flour to half a cup of this. And I've already got those measured out into my bowl, so I'm ready to go with those. I also, just like our other fry bread, I need my baking powder. This recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of baking powder, so I'll add that in. I have a bit of salt. I'm just using a 1/4 teaspoon. I have my 2 teaspoons of brown sugar. This is optional. It adds a lot to this recipe. So I'm going to use the recipe just as I have it on the card for you. And you don't have to add the brown sugar if you don't want to, but it does taste really good that way. So I've added that in also. Grab myself a spoon for mixing. All right, and then I have my milk powder. So again, I like to use milk powder. It adds flavor, and it adds some fat without it being oily, which will saturate the flour and make it not rise properly. So you could also just use milk if you'd rather, but I'm using water, so I'm going to use my milk powder. You don't have to add any milk powder if you don't want to. So I've got that in there. And then I'm going to be adding raisins to this recipe. You don't have to, it's optional. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Today I feel like raisins. You could also use dried blueberries, dried currants, any dried fruit really. I've also made this recipe, instead of adding raisins, I've added cheese and jalapenos, which is really good. So you can play around with that. Now I'm going to mix all of those dry ingredients together, and then there's 2 wet ingredients still that I need to mix. I have 2 eggs and 1.25 cups of water. Now, because this is a gluten-free recipe, there's no gluten to help hold the bread together, and that's why the eggs are so important. Now, if you have an egg sensitivity, you could use an egg replacer in the place of this. Just use the equivalent of 2 eggs. I have made this recipe without any eggs at all, and it turned out okay, but it was very crumbly. So the eggs really add a lot in terms of stability for the bread. So I've got my eggs and my water there, and now I'm going to mix it all in. And this is a pretty wet dough, and that's not a mistake. It's a very soft dough, and to be honest, our previous fry bread dough, our regular fry bread recipe, it's a pretty soft dough also, and that's one of the secrets to having really fluffy, squishy, really good fry bread. I don't mean squishy like wet, but just like pillowy soft. So you're going to be able to see whether it's too soft though. So here I've got my dough and it's a little bit glossy still, so I'm going to add just a little bit more. And the flour I'm going to add more of is the corn flour. And I need to keep some of this corn flour aside also, so I'm just going to add about a 1/4 cup of corn flour just to absorb a little bit more of that moisture. Now I don't want to add too much more, and like I said, I do want it to be quite soft. And just like my previous regular flour gluten, or not gluten-free, but our regular glutinous fry bread, we have to let this sit for a little while for the moisture to be absorbed by the flour. So I'm going to let this sit now. I'll show you what my dough looks like. So it's more like a batter. It's not doughy. It's much more like a cake batter. So I'm going to let that sit and hydrate and absorb that moisture for a little while, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how we form this fry bread, and I'm going to start heating up my oil right now too. So I'll be right back. Okay, my oil is heating and I'm ready to form my dough, my fry bread dough. So you can see it's just kind of a bit sloppy on my spoon, so I'm just going to use a spoonful at a time. Now you might choose to make your fry breads bigger, so you might want the equivalent of 2 tablespoons. Now this is a very soft dough, so I'm lightly rolling it in my hand, and it's softer than Play-Doh even. It's a very soft dough, and so you can see I've got this ball. Now what I've done is I've taken a plate and I've put some of that corn flour on it, and that corn flour is going to be a bit of a coating. So I've got my ball, I'm just gently pressing it into my corn flour, Mesa corn flour, and I'm just gonna take off any excess, and then there's my little formed fry bread. So I'm gonna set that aside, and I'm going to do all the rest of my dough as balls like this. I'll make a couple of bigger ones and I can show you how they turn out. For this, we don't score the center. It's going to cook evenly so long as we don't make them too thick. So I'd say that's like 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch thick, and that's perfect for this fry bread recipe. So I'm gonna form the rest. I won't make you watch me, and then I'll show you frying the bread. All right, I have my oil heating up, so I'm going to again show you how the oil should react when we put something into it so that it's going to cook properly. So I've got not all of my dough rolled out. I'll roll the rest out later on, but I've got a couple different sizes, some that are a little bit bigger, some that are a little bit smaller. I usually make these small, like almost bite size, because I'm cooking for a large community in our camps, because we don't serve gluten in our camps. Where I am, we have food sovereignty camps, I run women's camps, and so we don't cook any gluten for those. And so I'm typically creating individual size portions. So that's why I roll them that size. I have done them a little bit bigger though, and it turns out fine also. Now I'm just going to pull you closer and zoom into our oil so that you can see what it should be doing when I add my fry bread. So we're going to do our tester here and see how it reacts. Okay, so you can see there's a little bit of bubbles, not very much, so I need to wait just a little bit longer. This one will be okay, but I don't want to start putting all of the others in. I'm going to watch for bubbles. So there's tiny, tiny, slow bubbles around there right now, but it should be more rapid and obvious when the oil is actually ready. So right now I have this oil at a 7, 6.5 to 7 is usually where you want it to be, to give it a nice crust but not overcook it. So I'm just going to let this heat up a little bit more, and I'll show you again when it is correct. All right, I'm back and I have my oil sizzling nicely now. So I'm gonna grab my tongs. I'm gonna flip this one. We want to be cooking this for about 2 minutes on each side, and it'll be a nice golden brown on both sides. So you can see as I'm adding, it's sizzling right away. There's lots of bubbles. It's very obvious. That's how we want our oil to be. And I go around the outside of my pan. I know it seems silly, but there's a reason. I want these all to be properly cooked. And by having a pattern that we drop the fry bread into the oil in, it allows us to know that I need to start flipping them so that they go to their second side in that order. And then when it's time to take them out, I take them out in that order, and then none end up overcooked. So I'm just gonna give these the 2 minutes on this side, then I'm going to turn them over and give them 2 minutes on the other side, and then I'm going to pull one out, let it cool down a little bit, and show you what it's like. I have the first batch out, the second batch in, and here's that first example piece that we made, so you can see it's nice and light golden brown. And I can actually cut this in half and show you what the texture is like inside. So there's the inside. So it is airy, light, it's lovely, and I'm just going to put some jam on it, and I'm gonna eat this. This is my treat, and I'll continue to flip these until they're done, and you can see they're just a nice golden brown. So that is our gluten-free fry bread recipe. I encourage you, give it a try, change it up, do whatever is going to help you create the most amazing, impressive, creative, delicious fry bread creation there ever was. So that's gluten-free fry bread. It's absolutely fantastic. My mouth is watering, so I'm gonna have some right away. I hope you have a good day. Happy fry bread making, and we will talk to you on Friday for me to issue your challenge with making fry bread.